Good afternoon and welcome to our second February Take 10. Everything you wanted to know about Paisleys and Provencals as part of our Fabric Savvy series. And I'm Deb Barrett, and with me again is Jackie. Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Deb, as always. Looking forward to learning about Paisleys and Provencals.
So let's dive right in. First of all, let's sort of define what Paisleys are, and then I'm going to kind of walk you through the origins and the textile timelines, and Jackie and I are then going to kind of talk about where it fits in the scheme of things in textiles today. Paisleys is really defined as that sort of teardrop-shaped motif. It's actually has Persian or Iranian roots through India. It's that particular motif within the paisley is sometimes known as the Persian pickle or the buta, which comes from a Hindi word from the flower. And again here. So here you can see some examples close up. On the left is a hand print. On the right, it's done in a jacquard, and then in the center is an actual hand-carved block. So it's really about, it's referencing the pine trees, the cypress trees, and the date palm tree, by the way, and sort of this plume-like, feather-like teardrop motif that sometimes it's also called the palm, or you might have seen it in some hand blocks. It's referred to as the Welsh pear. Kind of interesting origins to all of these things. Love some of these pictures. A lot of textile design scholars think that the paisley motif is actually sort of a blending or a convergence of a stylized flower spray along with the bent cypress tree. As I said, it comes with Persian origins, and it really is embedded in the Persian culture. And the cedar tree is very important. It's recognized as sort of the Muslim conquest of Persia. It's a sign of strength, of resistance. It's also a sign of modesty. The floral motif, as it started out as the Paisley Buta, was first seen in about the 1500s, and it was used to decorate royalty, crowns, vestments, court garments. So it certainly started, in the aristocracy and then trickled down into the general population, moving over into India.
And the thing I find interesting about it, Deb, is with that type of history that it has maintained its integrity over all of these centuries.
Absolutely. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was first exported out of India with the trade routes, the East India companies, and we're going to reference that again when we talk about Provençals. And it really came about because they were bringing back cashmere shawls to their wives, significant others, if you will, or gifts when they were coming back to Europe. And these shawls were considered a status symbol because they took about 6 months, by the way, to weave, which is pretty crazy. But as you can see, this is actually one shawl. Look at the intricate work this is a weave, the intricate work within the paisley itself. So it was really all about, as I said, sort of started out with these sort of naturalistic, moved into stylistic depictions of flowers, and then as it's developed throughout the centuries, it's become a little bit more geometric and certainly more highly stylized. So let's kind of trace the timeline. Look at the first of all, the intensity of color and the amount of work done on these paisley shawls. I love them. Certainly highly collectible these days too, right?
Well, and it's the craftsmanship coming out of Persia and the Middle East and
Right.
India regarding these. It's just always been so intensely perfect, just perfection of design, and the time, like you say, that they put into these things is really incredible.
So first recognized, that whole teardrop design was first recognized and linked to sort of that yin and yang, deeply embedded into the culture, and of course with the date palm tree. We started seeing it in rugs in India. So at some time between the birth of Christ in the 1500s, it's made its way from Persia into India. In the late 1600s to the mid 1700s, it started being mass produced, and not only was it being woven on jacquard looms, but was also being printed. In France, the production, import, and printing of any Paisley motif was forbidden by Louis the XIV, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about Provençals. The designs were really popular in the 17 and 1800s, whether it was from the shawls that were being exported, the rugs that were being exported, military personnel obviously bringing, things to them. Cashmere shawls were sort of de rigueur, if you will, amongst women back in Europe. And it then started to be woven not only in India but across Russia, moved to Great Britain, and then into France. And then in the 1800s, or late 1700s, first of all, Napoleon is on his Egyptian campaign, right? And he falls in love with these shawls, and he brings them back for Josephine. And of course, the decorette that Napoleon was, and sort of the tastemaker of the time, it ignited this whole fashion craze. The traders started bringing the shawls back, brought them to Scotland, to Paisley. That's where the name actually comes from. And from the 1800s to the 1850s, they became the foremost producer of Paisley, woven Paisleys, by the way, in the world. Really, this is one of the shawls. Look at how large it is. Really kind of interesting. Around the 1870s, there was a decline, and it really kind of went out of favor, something that always seems to happen in a trend cycle with a bell curve. Couple of reasons for that. Fashions changed, and one of the things that happened with fashion is the silhouette changed, and the bustle and the back bustle became popular, and you couldn't wear a shawl. It wouldn't lay correctly. And then the Prussian War came about, 1870-71, and basically, trade and export stopped. So, it was like anything happens during war. You just don't have, the money. All of your resources go into the war versus luxury items, and these were very expensive. These were considered haute couture items, if you will. 1875, Liberty opens a store in London and starts selling the Paisley, but this time in prints, not in wovens, and starts making them more popular. Oops. So it's kind of out there. It's really nichey between, the 1900s and 1960s. It is being used in home decor. It's being used in fashion, but not anywhere near the way it was in the early 19th century, 17th centuries. But then the Beatles come on the scene. The summer of, flower power. John Lennon paints his this is his Rolls Royce that he painted. He also painted his Bentley with the Paisley designs. And it took on this sort of pop culture, more psychedelic image to it, if you will. And it became more mainstream. Then moving into the 1980s, when Ralph Lauren really started popularizing it. What he really drew upon was from the inspiration from the Provençal fabrics, which we'll talk about in a minute, and some of those Paisley motifs from the two Pierres, or Pierre Deux, and their iconic store in the 1970s in Greenwich Village in New York City. So shawls are really intricately a part of Paisley and how we use them today. And I just thought so I wanted to give you a little background. It's always interesting to have that backstory, that design narrative of where, you know, we are today and how it came about. So the shawl, as I said, is really where it came to America and to Europe. And the word shawl actually comes from the Persian shawl, which means woven fabric used as a covering. So it could be, you know, whether you're covering your body or you're covering, you know, your furnishings. They were really known for their softness because they were using Mongolian goats, and basically Mongolian goats, just a little tidbit here, rub against trees, and that's how they lose their fur. And then they come and collect the fur and the hair of the goat off of the tree. So they're very rare, and it was very sought after by the Europeans, but almost impossible to get. Shawls were first exported as a home accessory, not for the body. They were being thrown over pianos, over chairs, over sofas, and later was when women started putting them and wrapping them when the fashion craze became important. Certainly the demand was exceeding the supply, and thus the cheaper version, if you will, using worsted wool, not goat hair, was being made in Paisley. So it's kind of the difference. That's the critical difference between shawls being produced even today in Europe, or specifically Scotland, and in India or Persia, is the goat hair versus the worsted wool. So, and they also use a different jacquard loom versus a tapestry technique. So they're actually hand weaving them in Europe, or excuse me, in India, in Persia, Iran, where we're using jacquard looms in India and Europe today. So Queen Victoria also had a bit to play with it, and I thought here she is wearing a really wonderful shawl, but don't you just love some of these Paisley motifs? How intricate they are. They would work today. I know you do. You work in Paisley in some of your textile designs, don't you?
I'm a huge fan of the Paisley because it's so.
The thing about shawls is they are all made under the same framework. And if you're a textile collector, you want to look for shawls that have at least 2 out of these 3 parts to them, if you will, because of the fabrication. So they have a central field. Sometimes they're framed by a border, sometimes they're not. There's always an inner gallery and an outer gallery. Sometimes there's, depending on the size, whether it's a long rectangle or more square, there'll be narrow borders on the side and wider borders on the ends. And then sometimes they have these tabs, and those are actually made from the warp threads. And sometimes they're also embroidered and finished off to give them a much more interesting look. So here's an actual shawl. But where we're using it today is really, you know, with pattern becoming so important in home interiors, it's definitely a place to use Paisley, you know, when pattern is a plus when you're designing. You want to stay in the same color schemes, obviously, because you don't want to clash, but I think this is done really well. Here's a really large statement print, and then the smaller linear stripe, almost sort of a geometric stripe, if you will, with the pattern placed inside of it, but in the same color scheme.
Deb, can you hear me now?
Here's Martin Lawrence Ballard. This is using some of his fabrics from Schumacher. This is actually a bedroom that he did. Fabric on the walls within the panels, same throw on the bed, all in neutral colors. It's really kind of, look at all the different patterns, but the tie is obviously the common thread is the color. But, you know, something that's where you've added a bold color scheme and you've played with proportion and scale, where you've stylized it a little more, it really can kind of become fresh and modern and not necessarily that traditional shawl-esque kind of Paisley wool that we think of in other areas. Because Paisley can certainly be masculine. It can also be feminine. It can work with all kinds of things, but and looks, I think, from traditional to transitional to eclectic. I'm a huge Paisley lover. One thing you want to remember is that you want to mix, if you're pattern scheming with Paisleys, you want to mix in some sort of check or stripe, because that's going to ground what you're doing in the rest of the room. Look at this, isn't that great? But no matter what, it's really, Paisley fabrics can really make your room and set it apart. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Provençal fabrics. Another fabric niche that I really love, love, love. It all started, the story begins in Provence. By the way, Provence was named because it was the first province outside of Italy during the Roman Empire. In the 1600s, hand-printed cotton started arriving again through East India and the trade routes, and they were introduced by the Compagnie des Indes. They were called Les Indes, and they really grew to be very, very popular very, very quickly. And actually, they were introduced into France and Europe through Marseille, which this is where the trade ports were, the largest port in France still today. They were known to the English as Indiens, and they really represented these sort of gaily printed small ditzies on cotton or on silk in some cases, but mostly cotton. They were definitely immediately embraced by Louis XIV and, of course, his bride, Marie Antoinette. And so in 1664, he had his minister Colbert form the Compagnie des Indes Orientales to start importing the fabrics and the goods into France. And he also sent spies over to India to learn the secrets of printing and dyeing the cottons, because he wanted to bring the printing and fabric industry into France. Here he is with Marie Antoinette. You might know the story that when they were in Versailles and she started building the the farm, the hamlet out there in the Petit Trianon, she was using Provençal fabrics. She was wearing Provençal fabrics, and of course, being a tastemaker of the day, started setting the style not only for the aristocracy, but down through the emerging middle class prior to the French Revolution and the peasants. So it's taking hold. The Provençal fabrics are growing tremendously, even to the fact that Molière wrote an opera about it, and in that opera was dressing the men in Provençal fabrics, sort of as a satire, if you will, to what they were wearing. Obviously, silks and brocades, and now they're wearing, lowly cottons, if you will. But they're really known for their light and bright and vibrant patterns within the fabric, as I said, on cotton, and always color fast. That's very important, because that was one of the secrets that they needed to figure out, is they could dye and they could print in France, but they could not do it. They weren't using the correct mordants at that particular time to be color fast. And so the locals started producing their own versions, though they were inferior. Workshops were being set up. It was a thriving business. They were carving blocks of, flowers, arabesque motifs that were brought over from India. Most of the hand-carved blocks are done on fruit wood and then applied by hand. They were starting to look at inspiration within Provence itself, within the layering of nature and flowers, vines, insects, some of the herbs, of course, lavender being important. But then what happened was they got too big, too fast, basically. And here you can see these are actually hand-carved blocks for Provençal fabrics. And here are two of the dyes that were brought over from India by the spies, indigo, and then on the left is madder, which is sort of a ochre-y, orangey red, both coming from their natural dyes. A little history about this is that they started in Provence. When the sumptuary laws took hold, then they moved to Avignon, and one of the reasons they moved to Avignon was it was not part of France at the time, because it was where the popes were living in part of the Roman. It was actually a Provence still of Italy, so they could produce there without being shut down by royalty. So how you typically fabricate a Provençal fabric, which is done almost very similar but with machinery today, is you have to bleach all your linens, you heat it, you wash it, you dry it, and then you decorate it either with small line drawings or stenciling, and that was done with charcoal, and then they would apply the color with these hand-carved blocks. One color, one motif per hand-carved block. So when you're hand-carved blocking, it takes forever because you can use up to 30 or 40 blocks in some of these prints, even though it's you wouldn't have any, it doesn't look that way, but it's very time consuming, as you can see. So as the fabric industry started to grow in France, they started hiring Provençals, and they were soon mastering the techniques that they had stolen from India, and there were several key places to that industry, Lyon being one of them, Avignon another, then soon to move to Alsace. The big breakthrough was that the royal court hired an Armenian dyer who had worked in one of the workshops, and he started creating the madder dye, the red dye. It's known as garnache, and you can see it here. This is an actual Provençal print. This is Sophie from the Pierre Frey archives. This is actually from the 1700s. This is a Provençal, and this is one of the first pieces where this red was being able to be made. The other color that they could not make at that time was green. So what they would do is they would apply a yellow and then apply a blue over it to get the green. They still hadn't mastered the color of the green. You can see here's the reverse piece to it. It's a really interesting technique. So basically what you're doing is you're drying your cloths, you're laying them out in the sun, at some point to bleach them, then you're coming in here and you're blocking. Here they are blocking, and then you're going to you're going to set them, whether it's in boiling with a boiling technique or whether it's with a mordant already mixed into the dye. As I mentioned earlier, there were sumptuary laws, and the reason they came about is they think everything was just so popular that King was not happy about it, and the wool makers and the silk makers were losing production. So he banned the production and printing of any Provençal fabrics, and Paisley included. It lasted from 1686 to 1759. Which is kind of interesting. It was sort of loosey-goosey as far as enforcement, as I mentioned. Some of them were moved to Avignon, some of them moved out into the countryside, into Alsace, but until the French Revolution, basically, there were laws not allowing for the production of it. Here you can see some Provençal fabrics. Wonderful prints. I love them. I'm always drawn to them. Here are some vegetable dyes. This actually is Roussillon. This is the ochre hills. And this red ochre is everywhere. You just can't get away from it. You walk in the streets and it gets on your shoes. You touch anything, it's just all over the place. Here are some of the natural dyes at the ochre workshops. As Provençal fabrics started to come back into play, they started to take on different designs, and they were actually done sort of by regions within Provence, and in some cases also done by the master printers or the master weavers, and they were named that way. And then, of course, the Roussillon ochre dyes became very important, as they are still today. Like shawls to Paisley, tablecloths to Provençal fabrics, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but there are actually 3 types of tablecloths in Provençal tablecloths. There's the, all over in the center here. Sorry, should have done it that way. This is the linear, where it's linear designs, and then there's the border design, which is the most expensive, and you can find them all over, but a lot of cheap knockoffs, unfortunately, at this time from China. Known for their sort of small scale, vibrant color, tiny intricate line drawings. As I mentioned, these originally were done by charcoal. Now they're being done and printed, obviously, on screens. They're really lovely, and they work in all kinds of situations. There are 2 printers that are probably the most well-known when you think of Provençal, and Sololio is probably the one that comes to mind, because Pierre Deux is closely connected with them. This is actually their building here in Tarsakan. It was started in 1960, or it was started actually a couple of centuries before, but in 1916, Charles Desmarais bought it and then passed it down to his nephew. And then in the 30s, he took on the name Soleado, which means a ray of sunshine, very Provençal, if you will. They started adapting the Indines for home decoration. It was embraced, as I mentioned, in the 70s after the 2 Pierres came to France, saw them, and started displaying them in Greenwich Village in their shop, Pierre Deux. It was crazy wild. Actually, in the 70s, I was working for a large retail department store, and Gear and Pierre Deux launched their Provençal fabrics, and every department store in the country was at their door trying to get an exclusivity to show the works. It was very hot in home decor in the 70s, and then made a playback. I have to tell you, I visited the museum and the workshops when I was in Provence last fall, and unfortunately, it's probably the saddest museum I've ever been at. In the 80s, it was sold, as a lot of companies were, to large conglomerates that didn't understand the core of the company, and they moved into haute couture. And if you can just imagine taking Provençal fabrics and kind of translating them onto something that's haute couture on the runway, it just didn't work. And so they went down the path of fashion and having somebody else print their goods rather than staying with their core business, which was at being a converter. And actually what happened at that time is they split because their cousins were owned it, and Olivades was formed. So Olivades is still staying true to the printing and the converting of Provençal fabrics. This is one of their displays in Saint-Étienne, where their mill is. So again, even though it's mechanized, the process is done today just as it was centuries ago. So gray goods come in and they literally de-size them. They take any finish or anything that was put on them in the manufacture of the goods. They're bleached and in some cases re-dyed depending on what the background color will be, and it sort of gives them what they call the raw look before they start the printing process. So here is the bleachery, and here is some of the fabrics coming off from being dried. They still dye in the process which they refer to as à la lyonnaise. which is a screen printing process, but a bit different than what we're using today when we think of screen prints. So what you have here, this happens to be the dye formula for this particular pattern. This is the pattern they were printing when we were at the factory. So here are the dye formulas, and here are the buckets that have all the dyes mixed in them. And if you look really closely, it's so funny. It was meant to be, I guess, because the buckets are named by what the pattern name is, and the pattern they were printing, which was this above, is called Barbatin, and that happened to be the name of the property that we had rented and we were staying at. So it was 6 degrees of separation kind of thing. This is the printing room. Look how large these tables are. It's crazy. And again, you're printing one screen for one motif per one color. So here is the white goods that if one piece printed on the Barbatin, which if I go back, it's the blues on the outlines that you're seeing. Here's a screen, actually a Paisley screen that you can see that's been cut out. Here are other screens, and they're all labeled obviously by pattern repeat. You give a sense of how large the screen is. Once they print a screen, the guys take it off and they put it back, and then they go grab the next screen and they lay it onto the printing table and print. And so then they'll pour the dye onto the screen, and then a squeegee comes over and squeegees on the dye. So essentially it is a stencil process. Here you can see how many yards. I think they print something like 80 yards. The tables are, and the room is that large. Here actually pieces that are coming off after they've been after they've come off the table and they've been heat set and dyed in the machinery. It comes out into these big carts where they're then folded and put onto bolts and inspected. Olivaz today does most of Pierre Frey, Schumacher, Cravat, Holly Hunt. He's doing most of the print converting, Beacon Hill, for most of the U.S. manufacturers. So we saw all kinds of different companies being printed there. Here you can see this being inspected. Where Provençals are today, a couple of things that are happening in the marketplace which I think are lending itself to maybe a sneak peek of what's to come and maybe coming back into play. Obviously, we're all about sort of the 70s and 60s right now in interior design trends, but so maybe looking for that look. Jean Robuchon is very well known for his Indian prints and does a lot of hand blocking. His hand blocking is done up in Massachusetts, as is Peter Faziano's. So look for, John Robuchon does the same sort of look. And just a little tip, Jackie and I were talking with some people, I think it was this past week, and John Robuchon will be introducing an exclusive furniture collection, and I understand some of the prints will be on his pieces of furniture at High Point. It's the first furniture collection in-house for Duralie. And then this is Antoinette Poisson, and this is actually in Paris, but it's an atelier. These are papers, and these are called dominoes. And these are how wallpaper was applied in the 18th century before it was put onto rolls in the Industrial Revolution. And so they're using traditional Provençal prints, and they're printing on paper, they're printing on fabric, they're doing it as hand blocking. They showed again at Maison et Objet. They also had a huge exhibition at Le Bon Marché. In the United States, Jean Darien carries most of their products. They do some really interesting here. This is the Bon Marché exhibit. And then here are some of they do like boxes and fabrics, cushions. They do journals and notebooks, stationery. It's really beautiful stuff, and they're reviving the whole idea of the craft, if you will, of the Provençal fabrics and updating it a bit and making it fresh. So anybody have any questions? And type them in, and we'll wait to see if I hear you. Somebody wants to know, are some of the shawls still woven in goat hair today? I believe they are, and I believe it's being done in the Middle East, Iraq, Turkey, for example. While you're typing in your questions, I want to remember or remind you guys that, again, Jackie and I are going to High Point. So if you haven't been to High Point for a while or are interested in going to Point, please contact us. You can get all the information on our website at softdesignlab.com. And hit on the tour button, and there'll be a Las Vegas market tour or a High Point market tour landing page. We're almost full. We only take 20 designers because we like that sort of intimate, small group. We've got lots of wonderful things happening in our itineraries, which is a excuse me, a mix of educational events, private events. We have a private farewell dinner, private welcome dinner. Curry and Company always hosts us for a private luncheon. There's obviously the concerts, lots of parties. It's an awesome time, 6 days, 5 nights. And I'm also reviving again. We went 2015, coming back in 2016. We're doing the Paris Decor Tour because Paris is always a good idea. This is centered around Maison et Objet and Paris Design Week or Deco Week. We will be going from September 1st to the 6th, so it's 6 days, 5 nights. Again, lots of design destinations and insider access. You'll get to see up close and personal some of those Provençal fabrics at Pierre Frey's Archives or Le Manque, because that's always one of our favorite stops. So if you're interested, you can find more out at debbarrett.com. And after Paris, you can come with us to Provence, or if you'd rather skip Paris and come to Provence, we've put together what we're calling Everyday Extraordinary. It's a week in Provence. We're going to immerse ourselves in the region. It's really going to give you a week of unparalleled textile education, design expedition, treasure hunting. It's amazing what's down there, and it's one of my favorite spots in the whole world, and we're going to share it with you. We between some of the crafts, the arts, the history, the wine, the food, what can I say? And I just actually earlier today, oops, don't have the picture in there, I was going to show you, signed where our home base will be, which is in the heart of Provence, and we have rented a Provençal mas. So it's very authentic, by the way. So any other questions before I let you all go? Just want to remind you, give us about 48 hours and we will be putting up the recording of the webinar and send you out a link. So thanks all for coming. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.